Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean. And I am very excited to be joined again by Coach Kevin Spencer. Longtime NFL coach, over 2 decades of experience there, including multiple stints as a special teams coordinator. And he is here to help me break down the Thursday night football game that was between the Minnesota Vikings and the Philadelphia Eagles. Coach, how you doing today?
Real good, Max. Great to be here with you, and it was an incredible game to watch. So I'm very anxious to, speak with you and share some thoughts or answer questions or whatever. But it was very happy to be here and looking forward to this opportunity.
It's been fun talking ball with you so far, and I'm always pleased to have another opportunity. So you can find Coach at Coach K Spencer on Twitter. Not sure you're super active there, but that is where you can reach out to him if you like. You can find all our written work over at Defiant Takes Football, and our Twitter handle is Defiant Takes FB as well. So that is the housekeeping there. For the show coming up right now, if you're with us live, you're going to have our recap of the game with Coach and I. Then you're going to have Andrew Catlin coming on to talk about his artificial intelligence machine that predicts NFL outcomes. So he worked with this last year. He's updated it for the 2023 season. He's going to tell us all about that, and you can find his written work covering that at defianttakesfootball.com as well. And then we're going to close out the live show with Matthew Brown to talk a little bit of fantasy for the week 2 of NFL action. And then if you are listening on the podcast format, you'll also get a little conversation between Nick Merriam and Owen McCullough, as well as myself, talking about the week 1 performances of some of our favorite rookies. So that was live earlier on the channel, and then you'll be able to listen to it in the podcast format, like I mentioned. So let's jump into the game. And, I don't think that this was a shocking outcome, right? The Eagles hold off the Minnesota Vikings 34-28 in their own house on a short week. They cover the spread because they only lose by 6 points, but the Eagles walk away 2-0 and the Vikings walk away 0-2, unfortunately. So, I think the trenches were a big part of this game, right? We talked briefly about it before we jumped into the live action here, but, I guess from your coaching perspective, what were the biggest notes? Like, how would you have felt on the sideline of either of these teams throughout this game?
It was an interesting scenario going into it. I think Philadelphia didn't have an overwhelming victory versus the Patriots. I think, for a team that was so good offensively, they kind of struggled a little bit. Minnesota lost a very tough game to Tampa Bay. There were turnovers, and I don't think anybody counted on that. They had O-line injuries. Philadelphia has secondary injuries. So it was like this little drama behind the scenes, and these two teams trying to figure each other out. I think that you alluded to it already, the turnovers. I think Minnesota ended up with 4. They put the ball on the ground in the punt game. I think that, Coach Fleury's defense did a little bit to unsettle the pass game of Philadelphia. So I think at some point it felt like a heavyweight fight to me. Everyone was kind of feeling each other out, each taking shots, absorbing shots, and then I guess finally Philadelphia said, "The heck with this. We're just going to do what we do best, and let's put one of the best offensive lines, if not the best offensive line, to work." And really, put the hammer down, and they really influenced the game. They imposed their will, and those are the things that I came away with. But still, the resiliency of Minnesota, just hanging in there, just when you thought it was going to be over. Philadelphia's stumbled a little bit. I think the pass game, Kirk Cousins did a nice job, getting the ball up quick, short passes, trying to just get the ball going. So it was just an ebb and flow of the game, strengths and weaknesses, and I just was obviously impressed with the strengths of Philadelphia, saying, "Hey, we're just going to run the ball and make something happen that way." And Minnesota, just a tremendous resiliency hanging in there against a very, very good, obviously defensive front of Philadelphia. to move the football. It was just it's like in the NFL, you never say never. Just when you think it's over, it's not over. So tip my hat to both ball clubs. Very, very exciting game and intriguing game to watch.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to break this down into three sort of different talking points, if you will. So the first one is the pivotal moment of the game. And for me, that was when Justin Jefferson fumbled the ball on the goal line right before the end of the first half, right? So they're driving down the field. The Eagles are only up 10-7 at that point. And when he fumbles the ball, he takes away a potential opportunity to score, which would have been first and goal within the 5, and put the game up 14-10 in favor of the Minnesota Vikings. And ultimately, with Eagles getting the ball back there, they make a quick drive, kick a long field goal over 60 yards, and they turn it into a 13-7 lead. So that's a major swing right there. And then they're able to quickly add points coming in off of halftime as well. So, quick question. When you were on the sidelines and you had to basically get guys to reverse the momentum, so to speak, when something like that happens. So if you're the Minnesota Vikings, they're like, what's your mindset going into that? Like, what do you say to guys when you're in that situation?
Well, I think you're always reminding guys that we're still in striking distance. We still have 30 minutes of football to go. We just go in and regroup. I think you rely on not only their professionalism but their personal pride. And many of these guys not many of them, all of them are tremendous competitors. And even though they allow themselves a little bit of that moment of being despondent, but you just try and employ them to go back. Remember, you're a professional, you're a competitor. We have a ton of time left. We made plays, we just didn't make enough of them. So we'll find a way to get this thing done. We just got to stay the course, play the next play. You're always telling guys to have short memories. You can't linger on those temporary setbacks because that's going to deter you from making a positive play moving forward. So I think it's just, again, just relying on the professionalism and also the tremendous competitive spirits that many of these men have, that they're not going to, it's a temporary setback. That's the way you got to pose it to these guys. And I think that's exactly the way Minnesota continued to stay in this game, that they continue to make plays and feed off of each other. And as did Philadelphia. So I think that's the kind of things, Max, that you're talking to the guys about.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you are relying on these guys to be consummate professionals every single day of their year, right? You need them to do the work in the off season. And if you have a team full of guys who you need to be on their butt, then it's not going to work, right? So maybe there's one or two guys on the roster that are like that, but it's not something that you don't necessarily need to motivate all of these guys, especially a guy like Justin Jefferson, who clearly, kept his head in the game and came back on. I think he had over 100 yards receiving in the second half alone. So clearly he didn't get too far out of the mix.
He was making plays at the very, very end. I mean, they showed some sideline shots. He's pounding himself on the chest, essentially saying, "Hey, that's on me. That's on me."
Yeah.
And certainly, his performance was such that he didn't let that moment get him down. And that was a tough moment, but nonetheless, they continue to play their fannies off to get themselves back in this game. And Kirk Cousins is just a. I know he gets a little bit of a knock for not winning the big game. He doesn't win the big game in a national scenario, but he's an incredibly competitive person and made some plays down the stretch that allowed Minnesota to stay in the game.
So this is a slightly different scenario, right? Similar, but slightly different, where as with Justin Jefferson, he has years on his resume of being a top-notch pro, right? And not only can his team count on him to make plays, but the fans can. And so there's not a lot of external pressure, so to speak, to come back from a moment like that. But how about a guy who is on the back end of the roster, is not an all-pro returner by any means, and he puts the ball on the ground during a punt return? Like, how do you deal with that? Like, what kind of leeway do you have with a player before you consider switching up the role? Because, we're not going to see Justin Jefferson being pulled anytime soon, but you see punt returners swapped out on a relatively frequent basis throughout the course of the year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that again, a point well taken. I think that normally you say to guys that it's very difficult to win a game if we have that kind of a turnover in the kicking game, or the other equivalent would be to give up a big return. It's very difficult to come back from things like that. I guess to answer your question is you have to have, I think, a little bit of history with a young man. I was very blessed to have Antoine Randall at Pittsburgh, and had so much, relationship with him and experiences with him that I think if Randall were to put the ball on the ground, I think that I would be reflective of what I've seen this guy do in practice, what I've seen him do numerous times in games. And, once again, you pull the guy aside and say, nobody out here has played a perfect game today. Have a short memory. Let's go, because then we're going to need you to win the game. So I don't know much about the young man that put the ball on the ground for Minnesota, but I know, whether I'm dealing with a veteran like Randall or maybe this young man's a very competent returner. I think you just got to, I guess, reflect on past history. And if he's been a little bit shaky in the past, then I think you do have to make the change, and everybody has to understand that, that hey, it's a performance-based business, and if you're not performing, anytime you touch the ball, you have the team on your back, and if you can't guarantee that you're going to take care of the football, you really can't afford to have somebody in the game like that. So whether or not you change out that guy, I think it depends upon your experience with the young man, how long you've been there as a veteran young man, and someone that you can rely upon. And for instance, my Randall, I would never think twice about making a change on a guy like that, because he proved to me week in and week out, year after year, of tremendous competitiveness and competence in taking care of the football in a punt return game.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And my story of the first half were the turnovers, 3 on the part of Minnesota, including the 2 we talked about. Then they had one more as well. But then Jalen Hurts contributed a turnover for the Eagles with an interception. So it was a quick back and forth for a minute there. We had the ball switching sides pretty quickly and switching field position pretty quickly as well as a result. I don't think that we need to expound on that anymore. So as we flip over to the tail of the second half, for me, that was a tale of 2 offensive lines. Now, we've talked plenty, even you and I and Kyron, about the quality of the Eagles' offensive line. But I think even perhaps more important than the quality of the starters is the fact that they had all of their starters, right? And the Minnesota Vikings were without both their starting left tackle and starting center, and then their backup left tackle went down during the game as well. So I think when it came to the Eagles taking a quick lead initially by driving the ball down the field and then getting the ball back and striking, the Vikings were not able to respond with that, right? They got down quickly and they started to feel the need to pass the ball, but they weren't holding up to the pressure, and they weren't able to run the ball particularly effectively. I think their leading rusher had something like 28 total yards rushing, Alexander Madison. So that really was not a relevant part to their offense in any way whatsoever. Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison certainly made up for that with their quick strike ability, which is why I always felt that the game would be close and that they would be in it to the very end. But ultimately, pressure was a problem, and Kirk Cousins had another fumble in the second half as well. So, I guess, a lot of my questions are kind of relating to how your experience was dealing with situations like this, because you get it straight from the horse's mouth. And that, what do you do when you're losing key members of your offensive line? Like, how do you change your offense? How do you completely re-scheme? What is it like? How do you try and fix what's happening when you're losing guys like that?
Really difficult situation. I mean, because of the roster and what you have to cut down to the game day, you probably have 7. You have your starting 5, and then you probably have a swing guy who's a guard center guy, and then a guy that's a tackle guy. So, I mean, they're already going into this, I'm sure they brought people off a practice squad, what have you, but they're already down 2 starters, and they lose their backup guy goes down. It's awful hard to plan on that. And then, and as you said, I think the course of the game was such that I think Minnesota did a good job of dinking and dunking. They're hitting Hawkinson on short balls. They're hitting Madison on short balls. I thought they're doing a lot of play action stuff. But then when they get themselves behind and down in distance, or as you alluded to, or even the score of the game where you can't think and duck anymore, you have to, push the ball off the field. It's just very, very difficult. I think you just have to stay the course, stay with the game plan. There's not much. There's not a lot you could do because you can't pull the redshirt freshman out of the stands to supplement an injured situation. So it's just very, very difficult. A little bit different scenario than what the Jets went to, and then when they lose Rodgers, and now they got to go with the young, the Wilson kid, where holy smokes, you build your game plan around, a potential, not a potential, a surefire Hall of Famer, and now you're going with a second, third year kid. I mean, that was a radically tough situation for the Jets offensive coordinator. At least in this scenario, we just got to try and do the best we can, stay on course down and distance wise, and hopefully that we can stay in touch and we don't have to push the ball up the field vertically where Kurt needs to hang on to the ball longer. So just an incredibly tough situation, and you just hope your players continue to make plays like Justin Jefferson. And obviously Kurt, there's not much more you could do than that. I think it's just a very, very tough scenario. As you said, they were down 2 starters going in, so that must have been very difficult from the get-go, especially when you're going against the defensive line of the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, it was amazing just the Josh Sweat and the Carter kid are just very imposing individuals. So very, very tough scenario. Again, I tip my hat to Minnesota to be in the game, that competitive, given all those circumstances that they were facing. A truly professional effort, but they, as Bill Parcells says, they don't give out medals for second place. So it is what it is. They didn't win the game.
Yeah, true enough. And I do have to give some credit to Kirk Cousins here because whatever flag you want to throw at him, you can't put this game on him. I mean, he had a phenomenal completion percentage. He was poised in the pocket. He did have the fumble, but when you are the sole proprietor of offense, at least in terms of passing versus rushing, and you have 4 touchdowns, over 350 yards passing, and there's really no ground game to speak of, that's a lot of poise, I think. And I think he's a savvy enough vet to know that the skill players he has, on either side of him are always going to give them the opportunity to score quickly. And I think it's easier to keep your head up when you have that mindset. And I think we could clearly see that. So I just wanted to give a little credit his way because, while generally speaking, he might get that at 0-2, he's probably not getting a whole lot of props at this point, whether it be from the media or the fan base.
Sure. It is,
So,
quarterbacks get more credit than they deserve when things are going good, and they get way too much criticism when things aren't going well. But that's, not to make light of it. That's why they get paid the big bucks. They're tough guys. They got to be able to handle it. But he's a renewed respect from him after watching that Netflix series on the quarterbacks. Just what a hardworking, dedicated, young man he is. And so it is what it is, though. They're 0-2, and they've got to gear up and get ready for next week.
Yeah, I forgot you said you were on the Cousins bandwagon after that show.
Yeah, I was just incredibly impressed. And I think probably anybody that watched that, these guys just don't show up at 8 and they leave at 4. I mean, it's a total commitment to their profession and their professionalism and what they give to the team because it's such an important position. So I thought there was a truly great illustration of these guys they go home at night and they don't leave everything in the locker room. They take it home with them and they work their fannies off. But still, it comes down to wins and losses and what have you done for me lately. So I get that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Coach, thanks so much for coming on. We're going to be having you on every post game for Thursday Night Football, schedule allowing. And I suppose the last thing I'll just ask you, is there anything else about this game in particular that you wanted to point out? Was there anything that you, I don't know if wanted to get off your chest is maybe a dramatic way of saying it, but anything that you noticed about this game that we hadn't
I
covered
just
so
think
far?
It's really, and you alluded to it earlier on, it really comes down to the trenches. I don't care, we're throwing the ball over the lot and, we're empty sets, one back sets. When push came to shove, Philadelphia imposed their will on the Minnesota Vikings and took the game in charge because they have such a tremendous offensive line. That was dramatic to me, just that these guys are just so good. And then, and obviously their defensive line, putting the pressure on Kurt, shutting down the running game. It just goes to show you that with all the glitter and accolades that wideouts get, quarterbacks get, it's still, this is a game of physicality. And those people that have those physical type people, the offensive and defensive line, that it's going to bode well for you in games like this. And I think Philadelphia truly demonstrated that. Even though I tip my hat to Minnesota's, as I said, resiliency and toughness to hang in there, you have to tip your hat to Philly. They're in a good place right now because what they had, the strength of their offensive and defensive line, their ability to impose their will on people.
Agreed. And we will see how the rest of the teams that play on Thursday night stack up to the Philadelphia Eagles trenches. All right, Coach, thanks again. Remember,
Thanks,
you can
Max.
find
Appreciate
him
it.
at Coach K Spencer, and we'll see you very soon. All right,
Thank you
coming
very
up
much for
we
the
have,
opportunity.
of course, coming up we have Andrew Catlin of Defiant Takes Football. Andrew, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very, very well. So you can find Andrew at acatlin01 on Twitter. Of course, you can find his written work over at defianttakesfootball.com. Repeating myself slightly, perhaps, but I do find what you do very interesting, and I suspect other people will as well. So, first of all, before we jump into the mechanics of it, I am curious how you got into doing this in the first place. What prompted you to design this tool? I mean, obviously, we all want to know who's going to win, right? So that
Right.
aside, what kind of got you into this specific journey here?
Back in 2020, we had some time around the house, and I just wanted to learn a skill, just a hobby, just something fun to do to, I don't know, keep my mind off stuff. I got into some of the games, smaller games. Like I'd played fantasy for a while, but things like Pick'ems and the Eliminator Challenge, really got into it with friends. But I wanted to do more. I wanted to see the game in a different way. Saw that some of the best analysts in media pick about 65% accuracy. And I had a pick'em game where I was about 80%. I was like, man, if I could just be able to do this every week, add the consistency, I think we could really be onto something. So I did just a learn to code with fantasy football, and then after doing a few little projects, I wanted to make something that was really mine, and I went and explored all these different avenues, and eventually I came up with all the pieces that fit together to make this one machine.
Okay. Yeah. So I just checking myself here. Picking against the spread this past week, I was at 62.5%. So I picked 10 out of 16 correctly. So now let's see how we stack up. I don't remember what I did over the course of the whole year last year. So as far as how it works, as much as you want to get into it, and this is proprietary technology, so to speak. So describe how it is that you come to the conclusions that you do mathematically.
It starts with the offense. Even the worst teams in recent history can still move the ball. They can still get yards. They can still score some points. The offense's goal is to score. The defense, the goal is to stop the offense. So I went to just NFL's website, got official stats. I threw everything into Python and just tried to find correlations. And a lot of offensive stats correlated to winning, but a lot of defensive stats correlated to offense. So I started to break them apart and found certain categories worked well together on offense, and then the defense would match. So set up all these different blocks to simulate a game, and then set them against each other. So that's the quick gist of it.
Okay. So how did we come out of week one? How are we looking?
Week one, I didn't have any data yet. So the preseason data doesn't really translate well to
Yeah,
the regular
true.
season. So I just used some rankings from ESPN and a few other sites and threw them in just to get the machine cooking, but it went 10 and 6 too.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that sounds reasonable, to be honest. And we know the more robust the data, the more accurate the outcome will be. So when you did this last year, what point in the season did you feel like your results improved? Was there like a certain, was it just a gradual incline, or was there a point where it just kind of ticked up and that was it?
Every 4 weeks, I would do a review of what I had, and I would rework some of the lines, some of the formulas, and just see if anything could get more accurate. As I went, I learned there were more tools that I would want to answer a question I might have. If I
Hmm.
could get that into the machine somehow. Around the halfway point of the season, I started to really get something. We got up to on the back half, we were getting close to 75%, especially around playoff time. We went 12 to 13. So
Nice.
more data, it worked pretty well.
And so, Ed, do you think that over time, data from past seasons is going to be relevant, or do you feel like with the turnover in roster structure, in or injury luck, do you think that you'll be able to utilize that, or do you feel like it's more or less uh, just a snapshot in time?
Um, though this is the first year, I will have 2 different years data sets to compare against each other. So it's something I'm interested in and looking at. But so far, I feel like there's so much turnover, and the way certain players fit with certain coordinators or schemes changes everything about how they operate at least a stats level.
So, what were the original correlations that caught your eye and kind of made you dig deeper? So, you said basically offensively, it's kind of the driving force of this, I suppose. So, what were those original correlations? You're like, hey, let's dig deeper into this specifically.
Yeah, so when I threw all the different categories in, the big one was QBR. Uh, the team with the better QBR would win about 71% of the time. That's pretty big. Yards per passing attempts was number two, and I think it was first downs were number three. They were maybe 58%. So those really stood out above all the rest, and I wanted to know why, because passing yards was actually a lot lower.
Hmm.
So QBR and first downs were a good measure of control of the game, where passing yards can get accumulated in garbage time. So like little things like that
Hmm.
totally change what a stat means to a team and an overall margin for winning.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And not only can you accumulate them in garbage time, you can accumulate a lot of passing yards but if you turn the ball over regularly or get singular chunk plays, right? That's not really relevant to any kind of consistency or predictability, right? So if you are getting first downs, it's giving you more opportunities to advance the ball. But if you have a big play in the passing game and then immediately turn the ball over, then right, then how much does it
Yeah.
really matter? So that makes a lot of sense. Now, one of my backgrounds is so when I was first getting into football, I didn't really have a great understanding of how the game itself worked. So um, I set about trying to understand what teams were doing, right? Because I didn't have the time or access, or I didn't grow up in the world of football, so I didn't know necessarily how to find coaches film. I didn't necessarily understand how, or clinics at the very least, to understand how to watch film. So what I did was I looked at transactions, statistically how teams were prioritizing positions in the draft. I looked at the salary cap a lot as well, where are teams investing money, and then beyond that, where are successful teams investing money. And so I started to learn a lot about contract structure and beyond. So I'm curious, have you utilized anything like that in this at all? And if not, then that's something that I would love to kind of pursue throughout the rest of the season, or maybe into the off season, and see if we can find some interesting statistics there as well.
That is a good point, and that is interesting. I haven't looked directly at salary cap. I kind of wait till the team is set. Find chemistry tends to go a long way, but I will say that in what I've done, I've noticed that games are won in the trenches. The team with the better offensive line generally has the better quarterback performance and the better running performance to control the clock. So, for example, tonight, Philadelphia had a really good offensive line. But as demonstrated last week, Minnesota did not have much of a pass rush. They couldn't really challenge what Philadelphia had. The first half looked kind of sloppy, but I think you really saw it shine through in the second half.
Yeah, for sure. So let's take a look at what we have going forward for week number 2 here. And like you said, early days, it is probably going to be more challenging to get a high degree of accuracy here. But I am curious if I can beat the machine for at least week 2 for the very least. So what are we looking at for week number 2?
Do you have them listed, or should I grab them?
I can run through here real quick.
I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. The big one I like is Washington. Arizona threw a ton of blitzes at them that kind of threw a wrench in the machine, but they pulled together and pushed through, got the victory. The Broncos were dead last in quarterback pressure. I think it was like 6%. I really don't think they're going to get through the line. Sam Howell should be pretty good.
Okay. Nick will be happy to hear that. So we also have the Ravens-Bengals game. So that's a big one for the AFC North.
Yes. The Ravens have a lot of injuries going on and some questionables still on the list. Last week, Cincinnati did not have a great week, but they're the only AFC North team that didn't get beat up. So I think they might have come out ahead in the end. The Ravens are down 2 offensive linemen and possibly Mark Andrews and maybe 2 secondary guys. It should give the Bengals an opening.
Okay. We have Seahawks and Lions.
The Seahawks lost both offensive tackles. I think Lucas has patellar tendonitis, so he might suit up, but Cross is week to week. They had very poor scores in a bunch of defensive categories. I feel like the Lions can rip, and Aiden Hutchinson should have a pretty soft time getting to Geno Smith.
Okay. Colts Texans in the AFC South.
It's kind of a toss-up. The machine had the Colts ahead by about a half point. Both defenses are pretty stout, but rookie quarterback mistakes limited both of them in week 1. CJ Stroud ate a bunch of sacks, which knocked him out of scoring range. But Anthony Richardson is a little bit better runner. He might be able to escape a little more, preserve the drive. So Colts get the nudge.
Okay, and the Packers versus Falcons.
So I like this one because in week 1, Atlanta looked really good on paper. They defensively they stopped Carolina, but it was a rookie quarterback. The Packers, they looked really good, but there were some gaps. They didn't. They technically didn't stop the run, but it was mostly Justin Fields running all over them, and the machine can't quite differentiate quarterback scramble from designed run yet. So on paper, it looks like they're going to be really close. The Falcons come out ahead if Aaron Jones does not suit up. The running game just wasn't as good without him, regardless of whoever else ran it. But if he does and Packers are at full strength, they take over just a little bit.
Okay. The Raiders and the Bills.
It's another one where the machine really didn't like the Bills because week 1 did not look good, but they went up against the Jets defense, which is probably going to be pretty strong. The Raiders looked really good, but the Denver defense was incredibly soft. So week 1, I feel like every game you got to ask, was my team really good or was the away team or the opponent really bad? And
or
I
vice
feel
versa.
yeah, and I feel like that is a big question for the Raiders right now. Are they real? Are they healthy? But I think the spread is pretty high for that game. Bills minus 8.5. If the machine came out to about Bills minus 6, so the spread is something I would look at.
Okay. Next up, we have the Chargers and the Titans.
If I recall correctly, the Chargers will most likely take it. They have a bit of a better passing game, and they have the ability to shut down all those shots that the Titans try to set up. So they're going to feed King Henry, and they'll get chip plays, but those bigger gains that they need, that they really want to get, will most likely be swallowed up.
All right. We have the 49ers and the Rams.
This one is also fun. Both teams had really similar stats. Strong defensively, and they looked pretty powerful on offense. The problem is the 49ers played the Steelers, who had a good pass rush. 49ers handled it. The Rams played the Seahawks, who didn't have a whole lot of pass rush or strong secondary. So the Rams numbers look a little inflated. So 49ers will most likely take it, but these two teams have a history of going neck and neck down to the final wire. So I think the Rams are still a little slept on, but the 49ers will probably come out on top.
So the Giants and the Cardinals are up next.
I feel as though the Giants will probably win, but it won't be a cakewalk like a lot of people are saying. Lucky for them, it's not going to be raining in Arizona, so their offense should find its feet and get going. But the Cardinals had great efficiency on defense. They had the second most sacks. They had 6. They were just behind Dallas, who had 7. So Daniel Jones probably isn't going to get a lot of relief or a lot of time in the pocket. So if they can get a little more ground game going with Saquon, they should be okay. But this is probably going to be a tooth and nail fight.
The Jets and the Cowboys.
This looks like two major defenses slugging it out. probably a lot of run game, and probably pretty low scoring. Dallas's offense didn't do a whole lot on its own till the end when things were out of control. And the Jets are going to have to change their game plan to fit Wilson.
The Commanders versus the Broncos. Well, actually, I guess we talked about that one a little bit already, so we can jump beyond that. The Dolphins and the Patriots.
I gotta bring up the weather in that one because Hurricane Lee could possibly dump rain on it. The Dolphins are high flying, a great passing attack, might be hard to operate in heavy rain. If the rain hits it, it pushes it towards the run game where the Dolphins might be, or the Patriots might be able to take it. They were a fumble away from beating the Eagles last week, and the Eagles looked pretty good this week. So I think New England is a stronger team than people are giving them credit for.
Right. That's it always seems to be how it is with them ever since Brady left. Okay, so only two left: the Saints and the Panthers for the NFC South.
Okay, the Saints have a pretty good passing attack. Running wasn't really there. The Panthers, on paper, look good against the pass, but last week the Falcons only threw 18 times, and out of that they completed 15 of them. So statistically, the Panthers have some of the lowest passing yards against them, but they weren't really tested, and they kind of gave up a huge percentage of those plays. So the Saints do have the ability, the potential to walk away with this. The Panthers did rely a lot on the run game, and the Saints were pretty soft against the run. So I think the Panthers can hang around, but Saints should win this.
All right, and then finally, second part of the Monday night doubleheader, we have the Browns versus the Steelers.
Both of these teams lost key players last week. So Browns lost their offensive tackle, and the Steelers lost Hayward and receiver. Can't think of his name off the top of my head.
Deontay Johnson, I think.
Yeah. So the Steelers it might be a wash. The Browns looked pretty strong against the run and the pass, but the Bengals also put up the worst offensive line score, one of the worst. So I think the Steeler line is a bit better. It might test them. And then the Steelers defense is going to have to bend a little bit to stop Cleveland. I think Cleveland is a little bit healthier. They should come out ahead.
Yeah, they have efficiency on their side, at least if you look at the week one statistics, that's for sure. All right, so that's the full slate of games. And so as the season progresses, we'll be able to really look at the actual predictive outcomes a little bit more, because as we roll through these, keep in mind that we are talking about what the machine suggests versus kind of what we are as viewers aware of might be affecting these statistics, right? Like perfect example is the Panthers had very good passing statistics against them, so that would suggest to the machine that defensively they're strong. However, we know that not only are the Falcons not necessarily a heavy passing team. They are very intentionally a running team with a young quarterback, right? So it's just not what they attempted to do for the most part. So they haven't been tested by a stronger passing unit yet. So we're going to be monitoring that as we go forward. All right, Andrew, appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Me.
My pleasure. So we'll keep an eye on this as we go. You can find Andrew at Catlin01 on Twitter. And very shortly, we will be having Matthew Brown on to talk fantasy. Matt, how we doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Ready to talk some late night fantasy on the show.
Yeah, sometimes it's it's the time you have
Yeah,
to
I
talk
will say
football.
we're all kind of licking our wounds because I saw a tweet. I wish I could remember who tweeted it out that according to PFF, this was like the worst week one offensively in like the last 22 years.
Mhm.
So like everyone is just in pain of their outside of a couple people in terms of like the fantasy, the fantasy community, but just a lot of dud performances. Like I mean, both Dallas Goedert and T. Higgins laying goose eggs. Like it was just a weird week one.
Drake London put up
Yeah,
0
yeah, him
points.
too. Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers,
Well, that was extenuating circumstances there.
but still, that's
Yeah,
that's an expected productive fantasy player and 0 points.
yeah.
So, fortunately for me, we are doing IDP this year for the Defiant Takes Football um, fantasy league, and TJ Watt more than made up for that with 47 points for me. My God, he came through in the clutch, but I don't think I can count on that performance every week. So I'm definitely going to be hoping that my backup quarterback Derek Carr has a little more in him than he did against the Titans going forward. But
Yeah. Yeah.
oh man, whew, brutal. So first of all, Matt, did you really trade me a quarterback that is going that we traded now two second round picks for, and I got one pass attempt out of?
Yeah. So it's just okay. First of all, I have no ill will towards Aaron Rodgers. I feel horrible. Like it's awful. Everyone, of course, in Green Bay is like, oh, we're not getting a first round pick. I'm like, oh no, what have we ever done with a second round pick? Devontae Adams, Jordy Nelson, Greg
Mhm.
Jennings, like we'll be fine. But yeah, I mean, this was supposed to be kind of the best of this trade was supposed to be kind of a win-win for everyone. The Packers
Mhm.
get to move on to Jordan Love, probably get a first round, late 20s, or early 20s, late 20s, first round pick out of it. That gives them some flexibility. The Jets, of course, get Aaron Rodgers and a season there or at least one season, if not more. And now really that's in question. I did definitely not at work, read a lot of medical papers about athletes and Achilles injuries. And it was very good rabbit hole to go down. But the tough thing about it was the conclusions were they can recover, but all of these players were like in their late 20s, early 30s. And
Mhm.
then there was also this if they did come back 3 years down the road is when they started to see a drop off in production. Well,
Mhm.
Aaron Rodgers is going to be 40 and you don't need him for the next 3 years. Like at this
Mhm.
point any Jets fan is just like just give me one. Just give me one season of Aaron Rodgers. So it's really this, we have some data but it's also just completely unknown territory.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just funny. And the real reason that I bring it up is because Matt and I have been on this road together for a long time, right? We've been talking about the Jets and the Packers for well over a year since the 2022 season. And when we did the Defiant Takes Football staff mock draft, he was the GM for the Packers. I was the GM for the Jets. And we formulated a trade prior to the draft, which ended up being very, very close to what the
We
Jets and the
we
Packers actually
almost
traded.
nailed it. We
It was
almost
really
nailed
close.
that.
And you know what's funny is you would have had a better chance of getting a first round pick out of our trade package than what the Jets actually got because what the Jets actually did because mine was based off of the Jets making the playoffs or not. And if I remember right, and this one was based off of pure playing time. Whereas if the Jets squeaked into the playoffs, you would have still had your first round pick. So
Yeah, yeah. No,
I guess
that's
I'm glad I'm not the GM, but it was
yeah.
very close. It was very,
Yeah,
very
it was
close.
scary when the trade went down. I was like, oh man, I think it was you gave me Corey Davis And
Yeah,
instead of
yeah, but that's true.
which that's hilarious. And I think they ended up like swapping. There was like a 5th round pick in there or something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. I've already forgotten because I just don't
Mhm.
care about.
Yeah. No, it was closely estimated, and it was a legitimate barterer along the way too. So it was a fun process. It was a fun exercise, so to speak. The whole mock draft was, but that
Yeah.
particular part of it was cool because we both came at it very realistically, and you weren't demanding multiple first round picks, and I wasn't refusing to give up anything of value. So we got it done, and then that actually affected the draft, which was cool. And I think we even did the trade back where I traded back from 13 to 15. Now nobody really cares about this, but we barely talked about it since that
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
happened. So it
No,
is kind
it's
of fun to go back and look at. But
yeah, there was
but
no
anyway,
way like there was no way that all the like trade banter of stuff like that at the time was just like, okay, can we just swap first rounders, throw in a conditional something and
mhm,
get this done? Like, what are we doing here?
yeah. Yeah, it's funny, but and then this is the first time we've gotten to talk since the injury went down. I couldn't believe it. So I sort of in game, you have that immediate reaction of, oh my God, is this the Aaron Rodgers experience for the Jets? One
Yeah.
pass attempt and a sack, and that's it. And then you start to rationalize, be like, oh, it's probably just an ankle sprain or whatever, and so you like kind of force it away from your mind. But like, you're starting to see the information come out during Monday Night Football, and sure enough, it's a season-ending injury. And my lord, are we not just back to exactly where we were last year? But
Zach
whatever.
Wilson, baby.
Okay. As much as I would love to lament my experience and my luck as a Jets follower, I think the time and the place is probably off air or in a otherwise very specific environment. So let's talk about fantasy, like I brought you on to do here. So we're going to talk about some of your favorite sits, starts, and some of your sell high, buy low options. Your recommendations for people going forward, starting with week 2. So, starting with your key starts, who are the players that you're looking at as if you got them on your roster? Um, why? Who are they, and specifically, why do you want to feature them?
Yeah. So I in my starts and sits, I tend to try to pick players that are not the obvious. And most starts
Mhm.
and sits do this. Like, you don't need me to tell you to start Patrick Mahomes. Like, there's players that are matchup proof. And even like when players have down weeks, like if you have Joe Burrow, you're still starting Joe Burrow this week. Like,
Right.
that's happening. So the first one I have is James Cook. They have talked a lot about in the offseason, the Bills are like, James Cook, James Cook, James Cook. And he comes out the first game and doesn't really do much. But let's factor in the matchup. Playing the Jets defense. And the Buffalo Bills defense is not, or offensive line is not necessarily a world beater. But especially in these week 1 matchups, when we have such a limited pool of data, what we want to look at is opportunity, because fantasy football is all about opportunity. And so what was the positives of Cook is he played 60% of the snaps, and he got 12 of the 15 running back carries, and then got 6 targets in the passing game. If you are a Cook owner, that's great. Playing over 50% of the snaps, getting 80, 90% of the running back carries. He is the featured back. And then if you're in PPR leagues, he's also nabbing some balls through the air. This week they play the Raiders. Last year they gave up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs. Now, again, different defense, other stuff like that. However, we tend to find correlations are pretty similar from last season to the next season. It tweaks here and there, but for the most part, things stay there. So while it's Jets or Bills running backs are always kind of volatile. For the past 3 years, they've been trying to make a bunch of stuff work. I think Cook is a really safe start this week because of the matchup and because of the opportunities that he was given in the offense last week.
Yeah, no, I'm really with you on Cook. I think that he looked good And he's not the biggest guy, but he's explosive. So you never know when he can pop one off in the run game. And he is featured in the offense as a receiver. So even if he isn't stacking up a ton of yards downfield, if you add an extra, if you have a better rushing day and then you can add in another, 8 points as a receiver, that's not really asking a whole heck of a lot. And I think he could do better on any given week. He's a great player to bounce back in week 2. So who else you got?
Yeah. Josh Reynolds on the Lions. Jamison Williams is still out, obviously for the suspension. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the clear number 1. You could argue that maybe there's some Sam Laporta hype that's going to take some catches away, but I still think we're too early. I still think the rookies need a little bit more time. But I found an interesting stat, and the key is 6 targets. So going back to last season, Reynolds has 6 games with at least 6 targets, and he scored at least 12 PPR points in 5 of them. Great floor. If you're flexing in or have a wide receiver 3 of Josh Reynolds, and I can tell you he's going to get 12 points baseline, you're like, sign me up for that. This last week against the Chiefs, he saw 7 targets, caught 4 of them for 80 yards. So, this isn't going to be a situation where he's going to necessarily like win you the day, but he provides a really nice floor against a Seattle defense that I would not say instilled confidence in me to be able to defend the pass. I think that the Rams have some nice receivers, but I think that that worries me that they were able to give up so many yards to Puka and Tutu, and to which I now affectionately call all of them. I'm not even going to do last names. It's Puka and Tutu, and I think that Reynolds will have a easier time creating some things. They seem to be using him in a lot of screens and a lot of stuff like that. So there's a lot of run after the catch capability. I think he's a really nice, safe matchup because I think he's going to get those 6 targets, and that provides him a floor.
Yeah, I know. And I like that too, because the Lions offense has shown itself to be pretty consistent and pretty stable. When we look at their performance throughout the entirety of 2022, they made major strides and improved over the course of the season, and they're very well designed. And the fact that they were to come out and able to do that on opening night, I'm very pleased with. So I don't foresee this as being a major boom or bust offense. And even though Amon-Ra St. Brown is the leading receiver and likely will be throughout the entirety of the year, I don't foresee it as an offense that's relies on him for massive plays. He's a guy that moves them down the field. So there's always going to be opportunities within a drive for the other receivers to pick up yards there. Now, I will say that I'm definitely going to be starting Sam Laporta this week, because with the Aaron Rodgers going down, I am probably not going to be playing Tyler Conklin because he was my tight end. And without Rodgers, I'm not so confident in that play. So I will be playing with Laporta. So hopefully he gets some of those targets as well. But
I liked what I saw of Laporta in week 1. The rookie tight ends are always rough, but Laporta looked like he's going to have a decent role in the offense. It helps that I cannot name another Lions tight end. I don't know who they are.
I mean, I could have, but I feel like on the spot, I'm not sure I could pull one out in this exact second either. But not to derail you. So who is your final player in your starts?
Okay, I have Hunter Henry as a start, and this one is a little bit. You got to watch the weather. We with the rain, the passing may go down, but in a wild turn of events, Hunter Henry was the tight end 2 last week, which just feels weird to say in the year of our Lord 2023, but it did happen. The biggest thing with this one is that he got the targets. He had 5 catches, 56 yards, and a touchdown. Miami allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to tight ends last season, and this season has a high-powered offense, meaning that the Patriots are probably going to be playing from behind and going to need to throw it a lot. So I tend to look for where am I going to get the most opportunity? Even if it doesn't happen, the opportunity is there for Hunter Henry to get passes and the corners for the Dolphins are pretty strong. Linebackers, I'm a little less excited about, and so I like Hunter Henry. If you're really not knowing what to do with tight end, I think he's a pretty safe play. Again, watch the weather. If it's downpouring, I'm a little less excited about it.
Well, I could see a scenario in which that's actually almost beneficial because, if you have, or the Patriots offense is already not fantastic at throwing the ball down the field, right? They just because they don't really have the weapons, it's not something that they do super well. And so if it's raining heavily, I doubt they'll really try it. But they can't, well, I say this and then I think back and remember when they played a December game and threw 3 pass attempts. So what do I know? But
Yeah.
theoretically speaking, they will still throw the ball. And what is the easiest place to complete a ball in bad weather? Well, short passes over the center of the field. So at the very least, he might not rack up a lot of yards, but he might have a high reception total. So I guess that's more relevant in PPR leagues. But I could see a situation in which that's actually maybe not beneficial, but it doesn't negatively affect his fantasy standing, so to speak.
Well, and I think what you're seeing with the tight ends, 5 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown is not like, oh my gosh, amazing. And that was the tight end too. So really, these are all tight ends are really very low risk moves because it's not like you're counting on 30 points from your tight end. If it happens, oh my gosh, that's great. But if 5 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown is all it takes to be a top 5 fantasy tight end, you can kind of roll the dice with Hunter Henry and hope he kind of has a similar stat line.
Well, think about it. I mean, who have been the big time producing tight ends in fantasy over the past couple of years, right? Gronk's retired. Kittle gets banged up a lot and he's still great, but now they have Deebo Samuel and Ayuk and Christian McCaffrey. So he's just not getting the targets that he was, right? He's a big part of the offense, but not from a statistical production standpoint. Then you look at Kelsey. Kelsey's not playing right now. You look at Goddard. Goddard is now distinctly the number 3 option in the passing game in a run-heavy offense. So it's just like, who is that great tight end that's an obvious play, right? So Hunter Henry is as good a pick as anybody, I think. But
take your pick.
Kyle Pitts.
Never again. I'm never drafting Kyle Pitts ever again. I did that last year. I'm never doing it.
Burned badly. All right. So next we have your sits for this upcoming week. Who are you staying away from?
I'm starting with George Pickens. I think that the temptation with Deontay Johnson out, you're thinking, oh, more opportunities for George Pickens. Here we go. Max, who do you think the most targeted receiver on the Steelers was on Sunday?
That's a good question. I feel like I should know that because I watched that game. Most targeted receiver.
Not necessarily most catches, just most targeted.
Was he the most targeted and he just didn't get the ball?
No.
Who was it?
It was Allen Robinson.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which you forgot he was on the Steelers because I certainly did. But he was the most targeted receiver on Sunday, which I found to be very interesting. The Browns defense last week allowed 5 catches for 39 yards on 17 targets to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I really like George Pickens as an up-and-coming receiver. I think that Jamar Chase is better than George Pickens right now. The other concern that I have is that Browns pass rush looked pretty devastating. Pickens tends to be the go ball guy that he just runs down the field, tries to run past someone, and Kenny Pickett just throws one up. I'm not sure that Pickett is going to have time in order for Pickens to get down the field for those go balls to happen. And so I just think if you've got some other people on your bench, I think that, don't get me wrong, I could see a world where Pickens just, goes totally nuts. He has that type of talent, but I think it is high ceiling, but low floor. And in fantasy, I want a high floor. Even if the ceiling is not as high, even if I get burned, I'd rather have the safe lower floor like the Josh Reynolds than, well, Pickens could get 30 points or he could get 3. And so I'm keeping Pickens on the bench this week.
Yeah, I feel that. I don't think the Browns pass rush is as good as the 49ers, but it could very well still end up being one of the best in the league. And so I wouldn't be going all in on that play either. All right, so for your next one, I want to hear your reasoning because I don't necessarily agree with it, but I'm certainly willing to hear you out and be swayed. So who's your next sit for the week?
I referenced him earlier, my friend Puka Nakua, the hot waiver wire edition of all your leagues. Everyone was fighting to get him. It's all matchup based. He's playing the 49ers, and I am nervous after what I witnessed. I thought the Rams offensive line was pretty good on Sunday, but that was against a Seattle Seahawks front seven. I think that this San Francisco 49ers front seven has a similar day to what they had on Sunday. I think that Stafford is going to be under a lot more pressure. And if you also look at, I went back and watched that game a little bit. The Seahawks were able to stop them on first and second down. It was just on third down that Stafford was able to pick them apart. The amount of 3rd and 10s, 3rd and 12s, 3rd and 7s that Stafford was able to complete was just astronomical. And I do not think that on a 3rd and 12, Stafford is going to have time to pick apart the 49ers defense. I think that Bosa and Hargrave and all these people that they have on the line are going to be able to get to the quarterback. So I'm sitting him this week. I'm picking him up. I have picked him up in some of my leagues. I know you picked him up in our writers league. I think it's a great pickup, but I think that this week, keep him on the bench. I think Tutu Atwell is another one. Like if you picked him up, that's a great addition. Just sit him this week and wait until the week after. I hate the matchup with San Francisco. And that's really all it is based on is that, I think he'll continue to get volume. I just think this matchup is horrendous.
Yeah, okay, you've swayed me a little bit. Because the thing is when you think about it from the Rams perspective, they still don't have Cooper Kupp. They still don't have their guy who is that huge target share owner. And it's a lot of rapport clearly, and the consistency was there. We talked about him earlier. In our stream prior to the Thursday Night Football game. But when you look at who they're going up against, that's a bit brutal. And we might not see Stafford able to sling it around as much. And is he maybe a solid emergency play if you need somebody? Yeah, because he might end up with 11 catches with not a whole heck of a lot of yards. But if you're in a PPR league, then you might well still clear 10 points with him. And if you just need somebody, because if you're like me and you had freaking Drake London and you're like, I can't take another 0-point game, then yeah, maybe. But if you have another option, maybe listen to Matt here and roll with that.
It's the same thing with Pickens. I think high ceiling, could see all the targets, could have another 11 catches. Oh my gosh, this is so great. Also, I could see him having 1 catch for 9 yards and that's it. And you're going to hate playing him. So I would rather take someone with a little bit higher floor.
Get that. All right. Who is your final sit for the week?
Khalil Herbert for the Bears is my final sit. I watched every minute of the Packers versus Bears. and loved every second of it. As a Packers fan, I loved it. It was great. I'm pretty sure we broke the Bears fan base. It was delightful. But anyway, I like Herbert's numbers similar to like what I talked about with James Cook. He had, 9 carries, 5 targets in last week against the Packers. It's not huge, but Khalil Herbert's probably your flex back, and that's decent. That's decent opportunity for a flex back. What makes me nervous is that Tampa Bay is this defense has quite a lot of blue chippers on it and tends to be very, very stout against the run. And so I just think that they're going to have a tough time running the ball. The only argument I would say would be for Herbert is he is a good receiving back. If you watched any of the Packers Bears, you will know that they ran screens like it was going out of style. And so there is the potential that there are a lot of screens and Khalil Herbert gets a bunch of receiving yards. I would just rather start, honestly, I would rather start Puka Nacua over Khalil Herbert than this week. I don't want nothing. I want nothing to do with the Bears offense right now, especially against Tampa Bay. I also kind of want to see how the offense evolves a little bit more before I commit to really starting too many Chicago Bears.
Yeah, unfortunately, outside of some star power, I would really, really be loath to dabble in the Bears at all either. So I feel you. And Justin Fields, unfortunately, falls in that category as well. You'll probably still get some rushing yards, but if it went anything like it did last week, even if it's a little bit better, then you may still be looking at, points negated by fumbles or interceptions along the way as well. So
exactly.
Yep. I'm with you. I am with you. All right. So next we have our sell high option. So player that you have that maybe performed better on the back end of your roster than you think maybe going forward, and you might be able to get more for him now than you think he'll ultimately be worth towards the end of the season.
So let me be very clear with any kind of trade and selling high is, in a perfect world, we would love to sell our worst player and get something fantastic back. It's just not going to happen. And so I'm going to throw out a couple names that may give you a visceral reaction. And honestly, these players may continue to perform throughout the season, but it's all about the value right now. So the first name I have is Calvin Ridley. And you might think, oh my gosh, Matt, he just went off. And in this offense, he's clearly the number one option. I don't want to get rid of Calvin Ridley. Let me give you the case. Based on just where he was ranked, Calvin Ridley was probably not your first wide receiver drafted. Most likely he was your second, maybe even your third. So ideally, you have another wide receiver 1 on your roster. So what Calvin Ridley allows you to do is look at where your roster is a little bit more weak. Are you weak at the running back position? Can you get some type of top tight end? Can you get some flex wide receivers? Can you get a haul back that propels your roster into the rest of the season with? You've still got a number 1 wide receiver. You've picked up some quality players. You pick up a top running back because you find the person that has a glut of running backs but doesn't have enough receivers. You pick off one of their top running backs, and now your roster is even more powerful. And so again, feels bad after that top performance. However, I will say that's against the Colts. Colts defense, not one of the most stout in the league. And so I think you can kind of, especially if he has another big week this week, I think you can really capture the sell high nature, especially as teams start to try to take away Calvin Ridley. And then maybe that increases targets for Zay Jones or Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram. There's plenty of other weapons on this team. if Ridley comes out and just go and gets a bunch of yards, all these targets, you might be able to get a really big haul for him, and it could pay off big time in later in the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I think that if you have the hype for Calvin Ridley is very real right now, right? It was very real throughout the entirety of training camp. People love Calvin Ridley and the connection that he has with Trevor Lawrence, and I think that he does bring an additional spark to the offense that it didn't necessarily have before. But what something that people don't always take into account is that from a fantasy standpoint, sometimes that spark is very effective in the game sense because it forces defense to account for them, but also that opens things up for your number 2, your number 3 option, as well as the running game. So, I don't think that this is a guy that you should, part with for anything less than a haul. But ultimately, just like real football, fantasy football is a game of attrition.
Mm-hmm.
So the deeper that you are, the more high quality starting level players that you have, you'll be better. So if you can swing one player into many, then go for it.
Yeah, find the person that drafted Cooper Kupp in their league and see if they're willing to give up some of their top players to get a wide receiver into the room. So the other one that I've got is Tyler Algier, the running back from Atlanta. I think it surprised a lot of people that he got so much action on Sunday, but there's two things. One, Cordero Patterson did not play. So you had 3 running backs that went down to 2 running backs. And then the second thing is that Bijan Robinson is a rookie. You saw this with Jahmyr Gibbs on Thursday night, the opening night. You saw this with Sam Laporta. You saw this with just a lot of rookies around the league. It just takes them a little bit of time to really gain the trust of the coaching staff, get into the offense. I think that by season's end, Bijan Robinson will be the clear running back number 1 and be getting more carries. I think that Tyler Algier is a nice play. His carries aren't going to go away, but especially if Patterson is not able to go and he has another big game against the Packers, this is another one that Tyler Algier was probably not the first running back that you chose. He probably wasn't the second running back that you chose. Tyler Algier is probably your flex, or even in some cases, your 4th or 5th running back on your roster. This is the perfect candidate for a sell high because you are taking a position that he could just be taking up a spot on your bench. You flip that into a starter. Okay, yes, for the person that you're trading him to, they need a starting running back and they're going to trade for that. But for you, you just need to get rid of this bench spot, plug in a quality starter, and now that is the dream of any fantasy football manager. So I think that Tyler Algier starts out good in the opening of the season, but I think his carries start to decrease as Robinson. I mean, you saw it on Sunday. I mean, he took that one catch and just made people look foolish on the field. And I think that those plays are going to keep happening, and the coaching staff is going to go, we can't not play this guy. And I think Algier is going to see some dip.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really wise move. And great, he might still play really well for you this week, but keep an eye on anyone who's willing to shell out for him because he is a player who will likely diminish his role throughout the season, particularly if the Falcons do end up being playoff contenders in the second half of the season. Because if that's the case, they're going to start pushing their best players onto the field more and more and more. They'll start really escalating the development pace of Bijan Robinson, which is going to be more touches in every way, shape, and form. So I feel you on that 100%. All right, so let's reverse and talk about buying low options. If you can get this player for cheap off of a weak or poor week 1 or 2 performance from a fantasy standpoint, who would you pick up if possible?
got two wide receivers for you. I'm going to start with Elijah Moore from the Browns. The Browns offense looked okay. Nothing too all that special. And Elijah Moore had a decent day, to be honest with you. He and Amari Cooper had similar amount of targets, but he was more efficient with them. Donovan Peoples-Jones saw a wide percentage of the snaps, very high percentage. I believe I saw it was 80%. I believe I'm off the top of my head, very high. He did not have many catches. I believe he had like one catch. And so clearly Elijah Moore is someone that Deshaun Watson is trying to get the ball to. With their left tackle out, Nick Chubb, who knows what's going to happen there. And so I think that he didn't have such a world-beating performance that the person who has them on their bench, again, most likely he's sitting on somebody's bench. Can you trade one of your bench players? Just be like, you know what? I just want a little bit more wide receiver depth. I'll give up this guy on my bench. Let's just swap these players. No biggie. I just kind of want to add some more wide receiver depth to my room. But I really think that could pay off long term. If this Browns offense starts to find it, I think Elijah Moore is going to be a big part of it. And I think it's a very low risk move if it doesn't work. The worst you gave up was someone that was sitting on your bench anyway. Whereas the best case scenario is that this becomes one of your starting wide receivers later in the season.
Yeah, well, he is the Browns' most explosive pass catcher. There's no question about that. He's significantly faster than Amari Cooper, than David Njoku, and regardless of 40 time, he is more explosive than Donovan Peoples-Jones. And I say that thinking he probably did run a faster 40 time, but I think Peoples-Jones had a really nice combine, and I forget what his exact measurables are, but just in terms of cutting ability, like dynamic speed on the field, Moore is a bigger threat. And while he has less time with Deshaun Watson than some of those other guys do, I think as the season develops, he is going to be a nice piece there as well. And I think that he would have been much more effective with the Jets in previous years if their quarterback situation was different. So I think the fact that the Jets traded him in a third to go up into a second is not indicative of his value in the real world. I think he didn't want to be there. They didn't want someone who didn't want to be there. They needed to make a move to have the capital to go and get Aaron Rodgers. So I think that was a little bit of a unique situation. And I think that the Browns really value what he brings to the table. So I think if you can bring him on board, that is a nice move. So who's this other receiver for you?
Can't believe I'm about to say something nice about the Chicago Bears offense, but it's DJ Moore. 2 catches for 15 yards is not an ideal start for your number one wide receiver, but a couple things. One, that game got out of hand. It got to a point where it was, the Packers were playing their backups. It got to a point where I'm sure DJ Moore just kind of checked out in certain ways, and they weren't concentrating on trying to get him the ball. I think that this week, the Bears offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy, and the rest of the coaches kind of look at the offense and go, okay, we need to make a more concerted effort to get our number one wide receiver, the one that we traded the first overall pick for. I know the Bears didn't really need it, so there are questions of value there, but still, they traded the number one overall pick in this year's draft for a bunch of draft picks and DJ Moore. And the whole thing of DJ Moore was that this guy was going to be the true number one that we've been waiting for, that Justin Fields needs so we can see what he has. And I think there is going to be a very concerted effort in the next 2 to 3, 4 weeks to get him the ball. So again, he's probably on somebody's roster who's panicked because the Bears looked awful in week 1. And so maybe you can get him for not really a whole lot. You might be able to trade some kind of flex running back or even a bench player just to get him off the roster. And I think that will pay dividends because he is the wide receiver one on this team. Regardless of whether that team is any good or not, he is the wide receiver one. And we have seen plenty of receivers have great statistical seasons with quote unquote bad quarterbacks.
Mhm.
And so I think that DJ Moore, if you've got someone who's panicking, especially if he lays another egg this week, buy DJ Moore. And I think later in the season, it will pay its dividends.
Yeah, no, 100%, because he's also not a guy who is just this phenomenal deep threat that you need a guy who can get him the ball deep. He's a guy who can do everything. He can run routes, he can go deep, he can go over the middle, he can catch and run. And so that's the biggest one, because that means that you can feed him the ball in short situations, or in shorter passing situations, if you don't trust your offensive line or you don't want to force the quarterback to read the field over and over and over again, then he's the guy who can get touches and actually do something with it, just all on his own. So is he a top 5 receiver in the league? Probably not top 5, but he's by far the best that the Bears have. And he also is good enough on his own to just generate his own production once he gets those opportunities. So opportunities that he didn't have in week 1, I think we can expect him to have in week 2, because if we don't see it in week 2, no matter what the defensive scheme is, no matter how much they want to take him away, if they cannot get him more than that, then we need to start seriously questioning that offensive coaching staff. And I'm not saying we should do that yet, but if it doesn't happen soon, then we do need to start questioning it, and I'm sure they know that. So you can expect more from him. So if anybody is just down and out on the Bears through and through, picking up DJ Moore is a great move. All right, Matt. It is late night. It's about midnight where we are. For anybody watching on the East Coast, it's even later. So we appreciate you staying with us. Remember, if you are listening to this on the podcast format, coming right up, we have our rookie talk with Nick Merriam and Owen McCullough. And if you're live with us right now, then this is the tail end of the show. You can find Matt at Sorcerer Matt on Twitter. And of course, all of his Packers and fantasy work over at Defiant Takes Football, among other outlets. You can find me at TheMaxDean on Twitter. And then we are at Defiant Takes FB on Twitter, as well as at Defiant Takes on the rest of the social media outlets. How's that for housekeeping? Matt, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on, Max.
You got it. Have a great night.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.